For centuries, humans have been growing alongside our botanical brethren. Our histories have mixed and mingled to bring us modern medical marvels, faded folklore, and everything in between. Of course, in order to understand the plant, we have to start with its roots. I'm M. Grebner-Gaddis, and this is Rooted. Hello, and welcome back to another week of Rooted. This week, we're digging into an icon, a legend, and a symbol of pride, Trillium. Trillium is a member of the Melanaceae family, or bunchflower family, with famous cousins like Paris plants, fly poison, and some other interesting blooms we'll gab about later. For those of you who are swearing up and down right now that trilliums are lilies, you aren't wrong. It's just that science has gotten slightly more right. These bad boys were classified as members of the lily family until around 1998, when we started splitting things up a little bit more in Lilyland, and these guys were separated out because while they do have some lily characteristics, like having petals and sepals, that resemble each other with big showy blooms, they grow differently. And for that reason, they remain in the lilies order, but are not in the proper lily family. Trilliums are called trilliums because they have 3 distinct petals and leaves, making them super easy to see and identify, especially because they form a triangle shape. They grow fairly low to the ground and can be found all over the more temperate and wetter regions of North America and in some parts of Asia. They sprout in early spring from rhizomes deep in the ground that are often some of the first to pop up, serving as one of the first signs of spring to eager forest peepers looking for an end to the winter. And trilliums are very picky about where they grow, choosing to only exist in areas rich in nutrients and with not too much light, preferring the damp and fertile soil under the protection of trees. Because of this, they have to be early bloomers in order to get the light they need to produce enough food to bloom, which is why their rhizomes are so important. They have about 3 weeks of mukbanging bliss where they need to produce and store as much sugar as possible before trees start pushing out their leaves and ultimately crowd them out from receiving a ton of light. If they do manage to get enough sugar stored, these little cuties will start pushing up flowers on stalks that stay pretty low to the ground since they don't want too much light on their super delicate blooms. Most of these flowers start off a bright white, but gradually fade to a pink or purple over time. But trillium can also be deep red to a dark wine color and sometimes even yellow depending on the variety. And with over 50 to choose from in North America alone, there's truly no shortage of trillium to ogle at. While you might think trillium sounds like a lovely addition to any bouquet, you'd be wrong. These sweet flowers are some of the stinkiest, with smells ranging from rotting meat to corpse based on what I found online, leading some to give it the nickname Stinking Benjamin, which I can only assume is in reference to stinky founding father Benjamin Franklin, who once wrote a letter to the Royal Academy of Brussels urging them to fund his scientific quest to cure the world of smelly farts by investing in research that would hopefully help Ben find a drug that could make farts smell good. His logic? Asparagus made pee smell bad, and turpentine made it smell good, so surely there was something out there that could help men with the quote-unquote whirlwinds in his bowels. That whole letter is, of course, linked in the show notes for your reading pleasure, and it's widely believed that he did write this letter as a slight spit in the face to the kind of research they were funding at this time, but I also think that you don't pitch something like this unless it's something you're struggling with yourself. Sorry for the derailment, but much like a bit of flatulence, I just couldn't hold that historical fun fact back from you guys. Anyway, trillium is actually stinky on purpose, as it turns out that the stink is a very attractive thing for flies and other pollinators that might not be as distracted with some of the other flowers. And once pollinated, trillium produces a small white fruit that kind of looks like a cranberry, and this fruit is filled with tiny seeds that ants actually help spread. Take that, birds. Well, specifically, it's ants and it's yellow jackets. But basically, this works because ants and yellow jackets really like the fruit, since they think it's a tasty insect to snack on. And it's small enough that it doesn't take too many of them to carry. And if it does, the ants or yellow jackets can always pull it apart and spread the seeds that way. But most times for the ants, they phone their friends, and then they take the berry back to their place and feast on what they thought was a bug, but aren't too bothered to learn is a fruit. And once the feast is over, they discard the seeds at their front door, which is typically about 3 feet, or a meter for those of you not in the US, away from the initial bloom site, which is plenty of space for the new plant to put down roots and rhizomes. Now that we understand the plant, let's learn a bit more about its lore. According to many of the indigenous peoples across North America, including the Ojibwa, Chippewa, and Carrick people, Trillium is a sacred plant that is to be respected. This means it's not to be harvested or picked except in very specific instances, as doing so would offend the plant, causing them not to come back for several years. This is true, as it's actually very difficult for the plant to produce a bloom, and because of its shorter stalk, often it would be picked under the leaves by those who are unfamiliar with the plant, leaving Trillium with no hope of making any additional food after the very expensive task of making a flower. And without them, the rhizome might lie dormant for years, or even die completely. However, if permission was granted from the plant, its root could be used primarily to help in childbirth. This is because the rhizomes contain saponins, which can act as an anti-inflammatory, antiseptic, and as an expectorant, which can all help to make the symptoms and aftercare of childbirth just a little bit easier. That's why sometimes you might hear or see Trillium being referred to as birthweed or birthwort, and sometimes misrecorded as Bethweed, because active listening was clearly just not something colonizers had an easy time with. Outside of childbirth, plenty of varieties were used to treat skin and eye issues, thanks again to the antiseptic and anti-inflammatory properties, and sometimes they were used just to treat general illness, but mostly it was childbirth and skin stuff. There were also a few reports I read of colonizers deciding that because Trillium stank the way that gangrene does, which, sorry in advance if you were not prepared for that, but gangrene is essentially like a bacterial issue where your skin starts dying and bacteria starts eating it and it's really gross. But basically the colonizers decided, if it smells like gangrene, it has to be able to treat gangrene, because they were following the rules of the doctrine of signatures, which state that plants that resemble an ailment or body part are meant to be used to cure that specific thing. And they kind of believe that the biggest example of that is eyebright, which is a plant that is white and it has a bright yellow center, and they used to kind of rub that in your eyes if you had any kind of itchy eyes or eye issues, and so they were kind of just surely if a plant looks like something, that's what it's supposed to be used for. Just so you guys know, that's not true. And lots of people have died that way. So, don't do that. And while I might be mourning my perceived loss of a Powerpuff Girl episode in which the girls team up with Trillium to defeat the Gangrene Gang forever, at least the next 3 to 4 business days I will be in mourning, so just be aware of that. While I am mourning that, Trillium has more than made up for it in my heart through symbolism. And that's because in 1999, Michael Page, who is a renowned artist and activist in the LGBTQIA community, suggested that Trillium could be used to represent the bisexual community, in part to its ties to the Lily family, which at that time had been being used to kind of represent lesbians from the mid-70s onward in some cases, partially because of Georgia O'Keeffe's slightly suggestive paintings of calla lilies that she neither confirmed nor denied were meant to be vaginas. And also, he decided this partially because Trilliums were the first recorded instance we had of scientists referring to something as quote-unquote bisexual, since Trillium is actually a great flower to look at if you want an example of a plant that has both male and female anatomy, meaning they have all the bits you need to self-pollinate. And today we know that really makes them intersex, but they are still widely accepted as a symbol of bisexuality. While they are beautiful and useful, Trillium are also extremely fragile, and most species are protected, if not endangered, due to loss of habitat, over-harvesting with improper methods, and changes in our climate. Trillium is a super important factor of forest health and plays key roles in supporting many of the smaller animals in the ecosystems it's a part of. With that in mind, it's important that you never pick, touch, trample, or disturb Trillium in any way, and that if you want to grow or buy some, you do so only from those using sustainable practices. But to be honest with you, I would just steer clear from doing anything but celebrating the beauty of Trillium and doing a very careful little happy dance when you see it in the wild. Unless, of course, you're part of a community that has historically used Trillium in sacred practice. For the rest of us, though, I hope you keep your eyes peeled for this cutie, but remain a respectful distance when you stumble upon them in the wild. That's all I've got for this week, but I'll be back next week with new tall tales and true facts for all of us to get excited about. See you then! Until next time, be kind to yourselves, be kind to the earth, and just like a plant, drink your water. If you liked the show, please subscribe and consider leaving us a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else you listen. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram at rooted.pod. We're finally updating regularly on YouTube at rooted.podcast, and you can check out our website, rootedpod.com, for transcripts, updates, merch, and so much more. The show is written, produced, and hosted by me. I'm Grebner Gaddis, edited by Kat Friend of Friend Diagram, and our theme music was written and produced by Eric Cluxon. Rooted is a Henbane Media LLC production.